So welcome to this video about how to use an SLR camera. Most cameras, Nikons or Canons, are going to have your power. So here we're going to turn this on right here. Sometimes to do video you'll have a button somewhere on here, but in this case this SLR will have a video switch right here. Shutter speed is how long the film is exposed, or in this case the digital sensor. And aperture is how big or small the hole is. You can kind of see it here. See that little hole? That's the aperture. Now, once we turn this on and we set it, you can see here by playing with this here on this mode, TV, that's shutter speed priority, means that I can control the shutter speed and I can make it stay long or short. This is 1/60th of a second, 1/500th of a second, and I can make it go up to 30 seconds. Or sometimes the camera will say bulb, and that means you can just leave it open as long as you want, and then you'll have to manually turn off the shutter so that it closes the film. To play with the aperture, you can go to this AV setting, and that will allow you to play with the aperture. Now, apertures are noted by using an f-stop instead of seconds for the shutter speed. You use f-stops, and actually the f-stop is a fraction, which is sometimes confusing because the smaller number means it's a bigger hole, and the bigger number is a tinier hole. And the aperture is limited by the lens that you buy. In this case, this kind of 1855 millimeter. Now, if you are really getting comfortable with this, then you can set it to the M mode, and that's manual. The problem with that is you really have to understand the balance of too long of a shutter speed and too small of a hole. Otherwise, you'll get very dark photographs or very bright photographs if you don't have them balanced correctly. So sometimes I like to use these kind of shutter speed priority or aperture priority so that it can help me out a little bit. So a lot of cameras out there now have 8 megapixels or 12 megapixels. Remember, that's the amount of pixels that the camera can take. Now, if you want to actually use all those pixels, you need to make sure that your camera setting, if I click on menu here, is set to the full resolution. Right now, the image quality on my camera here is set to RAW, so you can click on the middle button here, and this will send you to the different resolution settings. RAW is a 6000 by 4000 pixel on this camera image with a lot more information about its lighting. It has not been compressed yet, and so it gives you a lot more flexibility in Photoshop. Sometimes people will do RAW and the large, which will be the full resolution, and will give you the RAW file along with the JPEG. And if you just want the JPEG, where it kind of compresses it down to a reasonable size, then you can do large. Just make sure you're not set at medium or small, because you're not taking advantage of the full resolution of the camera. And because memory is cheap nowadays, there is no reason to try to skimp on memory. However, if you were out and about in the field and you had no memory, then you can consider doing a lower resolution. Even here, this resolution is still pretty good for most online applications and some smaller printing applications. If I click on menu, so you can see I have other options here. If I click on here right, I can go to the second panel, and here you will see the ISO setting. Right now the ISO setting is on auto, which again, it will try to help get a correct exposure by setting its own ISO depending on what aperture and shutter speed I set. However, if I want to specify a specific ISO, again, I click on this middle button, set here, and I can set the ISO I want. Remembering ISO 100 is for good lighting, sunny, and if you're in dark situations, you go to a higher ISO. However, you might, again, have the side effect of a noisy photograph. And this camera has a ISO max option also. The last thing I want to show you is the idea of zooming in on a photograph. Here's the zoom in, zoom out. This one again goes from 18 to 55 millimeter. And depending on what you're zoomed in on, you press the shutter speed halfway. By pressing it halfway, it will focus on the subject matter. Depending on how you set the settings, it might try to average the photograph, or it'll have a focal point in the middle. And then you can shoot it. Now, if you want to purposely play with the focus of your subject matter, you can change it from AF, which is autofocus, to MF, which is manual focus. And then you will have to manually focus your lens right here. Now, in some cameras, once it's on autofocus, do not mess with this, or else you might break the motor. I think on the newer Canons, they fixed it so that the motor disconnects. So doing this doesn't do anything to the lens and won't break the motor either. Now, I always leave this stabilizer on because my hands are not perfectly stable. Most people are not. If for some reason you need to not have it help you, you could turn it off. On cases where I need a stable camera, I will use a tripod. In that case, it will be perfectly still. Have fun with your camera.